The Roman background was sketched last time. Now we have to start to outline the Anglo-Saxon, to explain, first, how we come by our historical information.
We are lucky to have what is called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle to help with the earlier history of the English. Its authors attempted to cover more than 1,000 years. It has news from other countries, even Rome and Constantinople. I say chronicle when perhaps I mean chronicles. The translation and edition that I have used by Professor Michael Swanton dates from 1996 and is titled the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. It is usually just called the Chronicle with a capital C, and it covers almost 300 years of Anglo-Saxon contemporary times, that is, those events written up shortly after they happened. There are included many centuries of events from Julius Caesar's invasion of Britain in 55 BC. These were lifted from earlier writers. One of these was Bede, whom we've mentioned, much of whose early information was taken from Roman authors, but there are others. Bede was writing in the first third of the 8th century, roughly 700 to 735. The Chronicle was very probably the brainchild of King Alfred the Great, who reigned for a little over the last quarter of the 9th century, from 871 to 899. Once we reach the Anglo-Saxon contemporary times, the Chronicle becomes a primary source. Some later chronicles, law codes, charters are also primary sources. Later histories written much more recently are known as secondary sources. We shall also be using chroniclers who, like John of Worcester, William of Malmesbury, Roger of Wendover, are very important. I shall identify the sources as they occur. Some of these are particularly useful because they contain information not in the Anglo-Saxon or other chronicles. William of Malmesbury is extraordinarily useful and has unique information on the 10th century Anglo-Saxon kings, especially Athelstan. It must be that he had access to sources in his day that have since been lost. It must also be that there is much more lost than has survived, so William of Malmesbury is both a primary and a secondary source. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was not compiled in one place, but was a series of writings or annals of events by different scribes, arranged chronologically by year. It is fairly terse. There are 5 main manuscripts named after the religious institutions where they were compiled. These are Winchester, Canterbury, Peterborough, Worcester and Abingdon. Professor Swanton tells us that he entitled his edition of the Chronicle in the plural because there are 5 editorial centres. It appears that there were attempts at some kind of central editing, perhaps at Canterbury or at Winchester. The 5 houses seem to have made copies, which were circulated among themselves and probably sent to others. Each centre also has information special to its own area, not found in the other 4 versions. There are some contemporary biographies and hagiographies, best known being the life of King Alfred by his friend and associate Bishop Asser, a Welshman. Perhaps dating from the early 7th century, English rulers probably disseminated their laws to religious foundations for local use, while possibly keeping a kind of central chancery of dooms, grants of lands and privileges, records of meetings of the great, when England was a collection of chieftainships or kingdoms in embryo. These chieftains or kings were shown the importance of written law and other state records by Christian priests sent from Rome, and later by English monks and priests, and we shall meet many of these characters as our story unfolds. What is also important is to understand that there was no written Anglo-Saxon language until the arrival of Christian missionaries in Kent, who used the Roman or Latin alphabet to render Anglo-Saxon words visually onto paper or onto specially treated animal skins known as parchment. Of final importance is that priests and monks were literate, educated, the only group of people who were, and this would make them indispensable to the functioning of early rudimentary government. While all the originals of the Chronicle, the first law codes, including the earliest one known from Kent, and similar records are lost, some survived long enough to be copied out generations afterwards by monks, particularly in the 11th and 12th centuries, which is how we have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle at all, the laws of Ethelbert of Kent in about 610, and of later rulers. There are some letters, mostly between priests and monks, but also between kings, records of conventions known as councils or synods of the church, which shed light. We shall also have resort to foreign chronicles, letters and other documents that give us a view of Britain from abroad. One such will be Notker the Stammerer, who today I suppose would have to be known as Notker the Orally Challenged. On the other side of the Channel, Frankish kings had a similar kind of history as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, known as the Royal Annals. The moment law was written down, and copies of it circulated to other church centres, monasteries and abbeys, even though the laity were illiterate, the law could be made known to them and interpreted for them in church. There was no excuse, therefore, for anyone, certainly anyone of importance, to claim as a defence ignorance of the law. This is encapsulated in the Latin expression ignorantia juris neminem excusat, which is still of great legal moment to this day in England. Writing down law also meant that lawgivers had to think about what was illegal, the implications of crime and their response to it. This is the philosophy of the law, what we call jurisprudence. Not even the Anglo-Saxon lawgiver was above the law, and laws seem usually to have been promulgated at national meetings of the elite at least. Sometimes so many people attended that these meetings were held outside. We shall attend, as it were, some of them. Very broadly, English law defines what is illegal, not what is legal. In France, which in 600 was known as the Kingdom of the Franks, we shall encounter some of their rulers, bishops, noblemen, because political, religious, commercial, social, cultural intercourse between the Frankish and British kingdoms was wide-ranging. The Frankish language was also rendered into written form under the tutelage of the Church a few decades earlier than the Anglo-Saxons in Kent, where the Church obtained its first English foothold. But law took a different course in one very important respect in the later Kingdom of France. French lawgivers told the people what was legal, as they continue to tell the people. This may seem no more than a play on words, a rose by another name, but the difference is crucial when you think about it. If English law is silent on an activity, carrying out that activity is legal. If French law is silent on an activity, then the activity is illegal. Law that emanates from the European Union follows the French model. This is known as Corpus Juris and is hardly noticed by anyone, superseding English law. You may have heard of British folk being carted off to Bucharest or Warsaw on an arrest warrant from Romania or Poland to face charges for activities that break no laws in Britain. History depends on the sources, and law is a fundamental pillar of our knowledge because it gives us an insight into men's thinking of matters of right and wrong, the eternal question which Christianity and all the religions the world over claim to answer. At the very end of this history, I shall give a list of some of these primary sources, which are available in modern texts, as also a list of recent histories by our most eminent medievalists and other histories I've consulted. I've been able to check facts in a number of very useful historical dictionaries, such as People of the Ancient or Classical World, Greek mythology, of saints, of the Church, popes, of other religions, especially Islam. Islam bore heavily on Christendom for much of our period and might even have overwhelmed it. At the end, I shall also give the name of the author, the title of the book, by whom published, where and at what date, which you will be able to print off on your PC in case you want to do further reading. Many of the books are in print and can be ordered from your bookshop or on Amazon. Others will need a good central library in your city, state or province, and a few will require one of the national libraries. The pictures we're looking at will also be listed at the end in the order they appeared. Each image will be briefly described and its location given in case you want to see it in situ. This series is also building up into a library, so if you came in on this 4th episode and would like to watch the first 3, you can go to the library and run the ones you missed. I must also mention archaeology. Very high training today in archaeological disciplines, the coming together of experts from different historical backgrounds, new scientific processes are enabling archaeologists to produce information that just wasn't diggable, uppable even 30 years ago. As I watch the excellent Time Team archaeological programs of Tony Robinson's on British Television's Channel 4, historical understanding seems to be increasing before my eyes, and historiography, how we view and interpret the past, is like a continuous revolution in knowledge. The documents are very scanty for our period, and archaeology is filling in some of the gaps or modifying our earlier understanding. I dare say that some of what I have to say will be out of date by the time we get to the end. Finally, as we've said, the contemporary chronicles and those a century or so later are almost entirely written by the clergy. They are therefore advertisements for Christianity. In reaching for an interpretation of events more than 1,000 years ago, we need, in a way, to read between the lines. This is not so hard, because in our daily lives we are all used to newspapers, television, and other reports from the United Nations to our own local town government, writing about things from their perspective or slant. We cannot see reality directly, and there is no such thing as the whole truth. The reason that fantasies and even outright lies are believed is because they are comforting. All any reasonable person can do is to interpret the facts with a good heart.
The next episode will reveal the Saxon scholar king who decided that a national narrative was wanted, which is now known as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.